Welcome to the Fundamentals of Fitness. I'm Alison, performance coach, founder of AB Performance Training and Coaching, and personal trainer. This is the podcast where we strip away the noise, the extremes, and the surface level advice and come back to the science-backed fundamentals that build strength, health, and long-term performance. Because progress isn't just about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. And today we're simplifying something that often feels complicated. Training, nutrition, recovery, supplements. There's so much information, so many opinions, so many must-do strategies, but not all of them matter equally. Some things drive results, some things support results, and some things barely move the needle at all. So today we're going to build a clear framework, a hierarchy, a way of understanding what actually matters most. This is the performance pyramid. So pop on those trainers or grab that cuppa and let's roll right into it. One of the biggest mistakes people can make in fitness is treating everything as equally important. They can worry about supplements, timing, minor details, whilst ignoring sleep, energy intake, and consistency. But physiology doesn't work like that, and your body responds to priorities, not perfection. So let's talk about the concept of limiting factors. In physiology, performance is often limited by the weakest link in the system. This is something referred to as the limiting factor model. For example, poor sleep reduces recovery, and low energy availability reduces adaptation, and inconsistent training prevents progression. You can optimize everything else, but if one key variable is missing, your progress can stall. In Formula One, performance isn't determined by one factor. It's the combination of engine performance, aerodynamics, tyres, driver skill. And if one of these fails, the entire system is compromised. And fitness works the same way. If your foundation is weak, small optimizations don't matter. Fix the foundation first. Because if you don't, you end up trying to optimize the top of the pyramid while the base is unstable. And that creates a very frustrating experience. You can feel like you're doing everything right, tracking your food, following a program, taking supplements, paying attention to details, and still not getting the results you expect. Not because you're doing too little, but because your effort is being applied in the wrong place. From a physiological perspective, your body prioritizes survival over optimization, always. Which means if your system's under stress, whether that's from low energy availability or poor sleep, high life stress or inconsistent training, the body shifts resources towards maintaining stability, not improving performance. So instead of building muscle, it maintains. And instead of progressing strength, it stabilizes. Instead of losing fat efficiently, it slows the process down. Not to frustrate you, but to protect you. At a cellular level, your body has a limited amount of energy available at any given time, and that energy must be distributed across multiple systems, maintaining basic physiological functions, supporting your brain activity, regulating your hormones, repairing tissues, fueling movement and adaptation to training. If energy availability is low or recovery is compromised, the body simply doesn't have enough resources to prioritize adaptation. So it reallocates away from growth and towards survival. In high-performance sport, this is well understood. If an athlete is underfueled or sleep-deprived, their performance drops, not because they're suddenly lost ability, but because the system doesn't have the resources required to perform at that level. Coaches don't respond by adding more stress. They address the limiting factor. They restore fuel, they improve recovery, they reduce load temporarily, because without those foundations, performance cannot improve. In motorsport, performance isn't improved by focusing on the smallest detail first. You don't start by adjusting minor aerodynamic tweaks if the tyres aren't functioning properly. You don't fine-tune corner entry if the engine is underperforming. You fix the biggest limiting factor first, because that's where the largest gains come from. Your body works exactly the same. I've worked with clients who felt like they were doing everything right, tracking calories, training regularly, paying attention to the details. But they were sleeping 5 to 6 hours a night or under-eating relative to training load and managing high stress at work. From the outside, everything looked structured, but the foundation wasn't stable. And once we improved their sleep and adjusted their energy intake, progress started to move again. Not dramatically overnight, but consistently, because the system finally had the resources it needed. So let's have a reflection. Take a moment and think about your own routine. Are you focusing your effort on the things that matter the most? Or are you spending time on details that feel productive but don't actually drive results? Because it's very easy to feel busy in fitness, tracking, planning, tweaking, but being busy is not the same as being effective. This is why the idea of a pyramid is so useful, because it forces prioritization. It shows you clearly what matters most, what supports it, and what sits on top. Each layer depends on one following it, and if the lower layer is unstable, the layer above becomes less effective. So instead of trying to do everything at once, we simplify, we structure, we build from the ground up. And that's where the performance pyramid begins. So let's start at the base of the pyramid. At the base of the performance pyramid, there are two fundamental factors: energy availability and sleep. Everything else sits on top of these. And if these are not in place, everything above them becomes less effective. So let's talk about energy availability. Energy availability is not just about how many calories you eat. It's about how much energy is left over for your body after exercise, because your body doesn't just train. It has to regulate hormones and maintain organ function. It has to support your brain activity and repair tissues and adapt to the stress you place on it. All of that requires energy. At a physiological level, energy is allocated across systems based on priority, and the highest priority is survival. So if energy availability drops too low, the body doesn't stop working, it reprioritizes. When energy availability is consistently low, we often see reduced thyroid hormone, T3, slowing metabolic processes. We also see a decreased reproductive hormone, estrogen or testosterone. We see increased cortisol, reflecting physiological stress. We also see reduced leptin, increasing hunger and reducing energy expenditure. These changes are not dysfunction, they are adaptive responses. The body is trying to conserve energy. Adaptation requires energy to a cellular level. Processes such as muscle protein synthesis or repairing and building muscle tissue. Mitochondrial biogenesis, which is improving energy production capacity, and glycogen resynthesis, which is refueling your muscles. They all depend on sufficient energy availability. Without it, these processes slow down, which means recovery is impaired, performance plateaus, and progress becomes inconsistent. Athletes who underfuel often experience decreased performance, slower recovery, increased injury risk, and disrupted hormonal function. Not because they're not training hard enough, but because their body doesn't have the resources to adapt. So the issue is not effort, it's availability. A very common pattern is people reducing food intake further when their progress slows. They think, I used to eat less to get better results. But physiologically, the opposite can happen. Your energy can drop, your recovery can drop, your training quality also drops, and the progress slows even further. Sometimes doing less actually allows more progress. So let's look at sleep. It's an overlooked multiplier. If energy provides resources, sleep determines how effectively those resources are used. Sleep is not passive. It is an active recovery process. So what happens when we sleep? During sleep, several key physiological processes occur. Growth hormone release increases, which supports tissue repair. Protein synthesis is elevated, aiding muscle recovery. The nervous system recalibrates, which improves your coordination and reaction time. And memory consolidation occurs, which is important for skill acquisition. So sleep is not just rest, it's where adaptation is reinforced. Sleep also plays a major role in hormonal balance. Poor sleep is associated with increased ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, decreased leptin, which is your satiety hormone, reduced insulin sensitivity, and elevated cortisol, which means poor sleep can increase your hunger, reduce recovery, impair your performance, and make fat loss more difficult. Your nervous system is also important here. Training places stress on both the muscular system and your nervous system, and the nervous system requires recovery just as much. When sleep is insufficient, coordination decreases, reaction time slows, and perceived effort increases, which means the same workout feels harder, even if nothing else has changed. See, elite athletes don't treat sleep as optional. I feel like I keep repeating this because they treat it as a performance tool, because they understand that training creates the stimulus, but recovery determines the outcome. I've worked with clients who felt stuck in their progress. They were training well, eating reasonably well, but sleeping poorly. Once sleep is improved, even slightly, we saw better energy, improved training performance, more consistent progress, not because we changed the program, but because we fixed the foundations. So let's think about your current routine. Are you trying to improve your performance whilst running on low energy and poor sleep? Because if you are, you're asking your body to adapt without giving the resources to do so. Energy availability provides the fuel. Sleep provides the environment for recovery and adaptation. Without these, the body prioritizes survival. With them, the body can improve. So once your foundation is in place, once your body has the resources it needs, then training becomes effective. And that's where we move next. So let's talk about the middle layer, training quality and consistency. Once the foundation is stable, once energy availability is sufficient, and once sleep and recovery are in place, then training becomes effective. Because training in itself does not create results. Training creates a stimulus, and it is your body's response to that stimulus, adaptation, that creates results. So let's talk about stimulus versus adaptation. This is one of the most important concepts in exercise physiology. Training is the input. Adaptation is the outcome. And those two are not the same thing. So how does adaptation happen? When you train, you create stress within the body. That stress can take different forms. Mechanical tension in muscle tissue, metabolic stress from repeated contractions, and neural demand from coordination and force production. This disrupts homeostasis, the body's preferred state of balance. In response, the body begins a process of adaptation. This can include repairing and strengthening your muscle fibers, improving your neuromuscular coordination, and increasing mitochondrial efficiency, enhancing energy system capacity. But these adaptations only occur in the body when it has sufficient energy, sufficient recovery, and repeated exposure to stimulus. Now let's talk about the role of progressive overload. For adaptation to continue, the stimulus must evolve. This is the principle of progressive overload, because the body is incredibly efficient. If you repeat the same stimulus over and over again, your body adapts and then stops changing. Not because it's broken, but because it's already adapted. A strength athlete doesn't lift the same weight forever. They gradually increase the load or the volume or the intensity or the complexity, because each increase provides a new stimulus, and that new stimulus drives further adaptation. But here's where most people get it wrong. They focus on intensity when they should be focusing on consistency. Adaptation is not triggered by one session. It is triggered by repeated exposure over time. Each session builds on the previous one, and gradually it reinforces the adaptation process. In the early stages of training, improvements often come from the nervous system, not the muscle growth. The body becomes better at recruiting motor units, coordinating movement, producing force efficiently. This is why beginners often see rapid strength gains even without visible muscle change. Over time, progress slows because adaptation shifts from neural to structural, muscle hypertrophy, tendon strengthening, and connective tissue adaptation. These processes take longer, which is why consistency becomes even more important. A common pattern I see in people is training hard for short periods, then they stop, then they start again, then they stop again. Each time they restart, they're beginning the adaptation process again, instead of building on their previous progress. Consistency is what allows adaptation to accumulate. Without it, progress resets. Quality over quantity. More training is not always better, and better training is better. What defines your quality training then? Well, this involves appropriate load, good technique, sufficient effort, alignment with your goals, and the ability to recover from it. Because if training is too easy, there is no stimulus. If it's too hard, recovery is compromised, and adaptation in both of these instances, it's reduced. So auto-regulation, which is adjusting the stimulus, and this is where auto-regulation comes in. Training should adapt to your fatigue, your recovery state, your readiness, because the same session will not feel the same every day. And forcing intensity when the body is not ready often reduces performance rather than improving it. Athletes don't blindly follow a program. They adjust within it. If fatigue is high, they reduce the load. If performance is strong, they push slightly harder because training is not rigid, it's responsive. And training only works when it's balanced with recovery. Too little stress, no adaptation. Too much stress, no recovery. There is a window where the stimulus is sufficient, recovery is adequate, and adaptation occurs. This is when progress happens. And finding that balance is one of the most important skills in training. So let's go back and think about your own training again. Are you chasing the intensity? Or are you building consistency? Are your sessions structured to support long-term progress or short-term effort? Training is the middle layer of the pyramid. It is where the effort is applied, but it only works when the foundation is stable and the stimulus is appropriate and consistency is maintained. And once those layers are in place, once the fundamentals are solid, then, and only then, the smaller details start to matter. At the top of the performance pyramid are the things that most people start with: supplements, timing, small tweaks, advanced strategies, the details. And to be clear, these things are not useless. They can definitely help, but only when everything below them is already in place. From a scientific perspective, the higher you move up the pyramid, the smaller the impact of each variable becomes. This is known as the principle of diminishing returns. At the bottom of the pyramid, energy availability, sleep, and training consistency, these have large effects on performance and adaptation. And at the top, supplement timing, minor nutritional tweaks, and advanced training variations, these have a much smaller effect. In research, we often look at effect size, how much impact an intervention actually has. For example, adequate protein intake has a large effect on muscle growth, and consistent, resistant training has a large effect on strength. Whereas specific supplement protocols and exact nutrient timing, they often show smaller, more variable effects. So if the foundations are missing, optimizing the top layer doesn't fix the problem. One reason people focus on the top of the pyramid is psychological. Details feel controllable. They feel precise. They feel like progress. Tracking supplements, timing meals perfectly, following complex routines. It gives a sense of structure. But the irony is this: the things that matter most are often the least exciting. Going to bed earlier, eating consistently, repeating basic training sessions, and maintaining routine. These are not glamorous, but they are powerful and effective. I've worked with clients who had extremely detailed plans, every meal tracked, every supplement included, every session planned, but they weren't consistent. Sleep varied, energy intake fluctuated, training adherence dropped. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but the fundamentals weren't stable. And once we simplified, removed the unnecessary complexities, and focused on consistency, their progress improved. Elite athletes absolutely use advanced strategies. They use supplement protocols, recovery technologies, precise timing strategies, but only after their training is structured, energy intake is appropriate, and sleep is prioritized. Because at that level, small improvements matter, but only because the foundation is already strong. In motorsport, optimization happens at the margins, tiny adjustments to aerodynamics, small changes in tyre pressure, but only once the engine is functioning, the car is stable, and the core systems are reliable. You don't fine-tune a system that isn't working. You fix it first. There is a point where the top of the pyramid becomes important. Usually when training is consistent, recovery is strong, nutrition is stable, and progress has plateaued. At that stage, small improvements can create meaningful change because everything else is already aligned. At the right time, optimization might include improving protein distribution across meals. It might improve with refining training split structure, adjusting volume for specific goals, and using supplements with evidence-based support. But these are refinements, not foundations, and that distinction matters. When people start at the top, several things happen. Progress becomes inconsistent, frustration increases, adherence drops, and confidence can decrease because the strategies they're using don't address the real limiting factor. And the real issue is rarely, I need better supplements. It's more often, I need a stronger foundation. So let's go back and think about your own approach. Are you focusing on optimization before your fundamentals are stable? Because if you are, you're making progress harder than it needs to be. The performance pyramid is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters the most in the right order. At the base, energy and sleep. Above that, training quality and consistency. At the top, optimization. Each layer supports the next. And if the base is weak, the entire structure becomes unstable. But when the base is strong, everything above it becomes more effective. Progress doesn't come from chasing everything. It comes from prioritizing correctly. And once you understand that, fitness becomes simpler, clearer, more sustainable. The performance pyramid gives you clarity. It shows where to focus your effort because not everything matters equally. And once you understand that, you stop chasing everything and start focusing on what exactly drives results. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and thank you so much for listening and putting your trust in me. If this episode has helped simplify your approach to training and performance, share it with someone who feels overwhelmed by conflicting advice, because clarity changes everything. And if you're building long-term strength, health, and performance, make sure you're following the fundamentals of fitness so you don't miss what's coming next. Next time, we're going to explore emotional regulation and training, and why your mindset and nervous system shape your performance way more than you think. Until then, train with structure, recover with intention, and build something that lasts. I'll see you in the next one.